Welcome to another Jabba's Palace roll call, where we look at the backstories and merchandise for some of the lesser-known characters from Jabba's Palace. Today's character, Tessek. Tessek, or Squid Head as he was originally called, was one of the more distinctive-looking members of Jabba's Palace, although I would forgive you if you missed his first appearance on screen. In fact, you just saw it. Let's look at it again in slow motion. There he is, standing next to Boba Fett. We can also see him from behind as he sits in an alcove here. And here he is from the front, behind Ula. We get a few more glimpses of him there in the background during this entire dance sequence, but it isn't until Ula falls into the Rancor pit that we finally get a good look at him. He appears to be laughing animatedly at her misfortune. A bit later, there is a disturbance by the entrance, and we can see him walking that way to investigate. It turns out it's Leia in disguise, accompanied by Chewbacca, and we can see him kind of scrambling to get out of the way. We catch another glimpse of him here as they take Chewbacca away, and like so many of the other palace aliens, he's in this shot as well. Later on, when Luke shows up at the palace, we get a rather interesting sight, which is Tessek and Yarna apparently holding hands and sleeping together in an alcove, which I think is something that not everyone might have noticed. We'll come back to this a little bit later. I think Tessek is featured most prominently in this next scene, though, where he's shown standing kind of sassily behind Luke Skywalker. And he remains there pretty much through the entire sequence here where Luke is talking to Jabba. After Luke falls into the Rancor pit and defeats the Rancor, we do get one last shot of Tessek kind of filing out of the palace, going toward, you guessed it, the sail barge. And that's where we get our last few glimpses of the character. First, he's standing next to Max Rebo and kind of vibing to the music a bit. And then he's also part of the crowd looking out at our heroes on the skiff as Jabba condemns them all to death. That's about it for the character in Return of the Jedi. We don't see anything more of him, and like so many characters from the palace, the film doesn't really tell us what happens to him after the barge exploded, but we'll come back to that question in a little bit. As I was going through the Jabba's Palace scenes to see where Tessek appeared, I was struck by how many scenes he actually does appear in, even if it's just a little bit in the background, and that's a bit different than some of the other characters that I've featured in this series. But that doesn't change the fact that, just going from the movie, we have no idea who this character is or what he's doing in the palace, so let's look a little bit at his backstory, shall we? Like so many characters in this series, Tessek's backstory can largely be found in Tales from Jabba's Palace, a collection of short stories by various authors about characters from the palace. And yes, these may not be considered canon anymore, but I don't think any other information has come up to contradict it. In the same way that Tessek is featured in a number of scenes in the Jabba's Palace section of Return of the Jedi, he also is featured in a lot of these stories as kind of a side character, but his main backstory can be found in this one, A Freak Warren in the Palace, Tessek's Tale by Dave Wolverton. In it, we learn that Tessek is Jabba's accountant, or bookkeeper. He had been exiled from his watery home planet of Mon Cala, and as an amphibian, he hated the deserts of Tatooine. His skin would become painfully dry and cracked just from being out in the sun for a short time. Like most of the residents of the palace, he had been plotting to assassinate Jabba. He had planned to kill him with a bomb planted in one of the skiffs, and then take over the clean parts of Jabba's empire, while Jabba's rival, Lady Valerian, took over his actual criminal enterprises. However, the unexpected arrival of Luke and his friends threw a monkey wrench into his plans, and he was forced to give up the plot with the bomb. But he still hadn't given up his idea of assassinating Jabba. During the chaos on the sail barge, Tessek had a good opportunity to shoot Jabba in the back. But before he could take his shot, Leia grabbed her chain and wrapped it around Jabba's neck. Tessek decided to just go ahead and let this happen, and in fact shot one of the Weequay guards who seemed to be noticing and might have come to Jabba's aid. After the crime lord's death, Tessek escaped on a speeder just before the sail barge exploded, and he returned to Jabba's palace with the intent of taking over. When he arrived, however, he was greeted by the Bomar monks, the original inhabitants of Jabba's palace, who had removed their brains to allow them to contemplate the mysteries of the universe, free from the distractions of physical bodies. They removed Tessek's brain and had him join them, And ironically, Tessek eventually found that he was much happier this way. He was no longer tortured by the desert climate of Tatooine, and he didn't have any desire for physical wealth. Indeed, he was a free Quarren at last. So, I guess that's a happy ending of a sort. The character of Squidhead was designed by Christopher Wallace, who's best known for his work on Gremlins, The Fly, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. This concept sketch is dated 1981 and is probably the earliest version of the character. It has the character's original name of Squid Face at the bottom right, and as you can see, the final version of the character stayed very close to this original concept. There's also this concept maquette, which honestly looks like he's been decomposing for quite some time. Wallace designed several of the background characters from Jabba's palace, all of whom seem to have some animal-like features, and indeed, Wallace mentioned in an interview that starting from real animals was an easy and quick way to design aliens like this. Tessek was brought to life by character actor Gerald Holm, who was credited in the film as a mime performer. He has said that he and some of the other actors playing aliens in Jabba's palace had been led to believe that their parts would be a lot bigger than they ended up being, and that they weren't originally supposed to just be in the background. I'm not sure if that was a miscommunication or if the director made some last-minute changes, but it's interesting to think about a version of the film where these background characters were featured a lot more prominently. Despite being relegated mostly to the background, Mr. Holm did come up with some of his own backstory for the character. For example, he and actress Claire Davenport, who played Yarna, decided that their characters had been romantically involved in the past, but were now just good friends. Apparently, while filming this scene of them sleeping, they struggled not to laugh at the snoring noises Mr. Holm was making. In addition to Tessek, Mr. Holm also played this Mon Calamari officer in Return of the Jedi, and played many parts on stage, TV, and screen during his acting career, but he's probably best known for a very different kind of role.
To prove the new Mr. Muscle range tackles the filthiest of jobs with plenty of muscle, we gave it to someone with none.
That's right. For nearly 10 years, Mr. Holm played Mr. Muscle, the mascot of a range of household cleaning products. And while I don't think this was ever shown in the US, these ads were very popular in Europe and elsewhere, so Mr. Holm was actually fairly well known for this. After Return of the Jedi, he had almost nothing to do with Star Wars for many years, but starting around 2003, he began to become very involved with Star Wars fandom, becoming a frequent guest at conventions and posting actively online. For more than a decade, he had a thread in the autographs and photographs section of the Rebel Scum forums where he would talk about his experiences during Return of the Jedi. He seemed to genuinely enjoy interacting with fans, and he became quite a popular guest at fan events such as this one in Germany, where he was apparently a guest of honor. It's amazing to think that someone could go from playing a background character with no lines to this, but that's the power of Star Wars for you. Sadly, Mr. Holm passed away just last year. His positive influence on Star Wars fandom will be missed. Without a doubt, the most well-known piece of Tessek merchandise is the vintage Kenner action figure, and it's worth pointing out that it's mostly because of this figure that people remember the character at all. It's actually a really nice figure, though. As you can see, his outfit is made of two kinds of cloth, which is kind of unusual. He's got a cloak, goes around his neck, and then he's also got this skirt. And underneath the skirt, he's got a fully sculpted outfit as well, so you can kind of display him without this soft goods as well. He's got this kind of cummerbund kind of thing that goes around. So it's actually a pretty involved outfit, and he comes with this blaster that he can hold, although we don't see him actually holding anything like that in the film. I like the head sculpt pretty well. I think it really captures the character, although I don't know why they went with this color. I think a sort of orangey brown would have looked more accurate. By the way, I couldn't resist showing you this image from Left Coast Graphics. It's part of his Behind the Mask series that shows some of the actors who played masked characters in Star Wars. This one, of course, is Mr. Holm as the vintage Squidhead figure, which I think is really quite an inspired concept. A mold for Tessek was included in the vintage Jabba the Hutt Play-Doh set, which I've done a whole video about, by the way. Here is that mold. You can see he's side by side with Luke Skywalker there. And it might be a little difficult to tell what this actually looks like without making an actual Play-Doh impression of it. So I did that, except using some epoxy putty, so it'll be permanent. And you can get a pretty good idea of what he looks like here. I also embedded a paperclip in the back that would allow him to stand up. He was also included in these vintage-era Dixie cups. They had various cups with different characters from Jabba's palace. Here he is as Squid Head with Gargan, or Yarna, and of course the Gamorrean guards. Just like in the film, Tessek appeared in the background of a lot of vintage-era products, like we have him here in the background of this Waddington's puzzle from the UK, and this puzzle from Craftmaster in the US, a little bit more prominently featured there. The character appeared several times in these activity books by Happy House. Here's one where you're supposed to tell what's missing by studying the first page and looking at all the details. There's Tessek there. And then looking at the second page and seeing what's changed. In fact, with Tessek, you can see that he's got Max Rebo there under his arm on the second page. And he also appeared on this game board for another game on the following page. This dot-to-dot fun book had a number of pictures that you could reveal by connecting the dots. Here's Jabba, of course. And on this page are Tessek and Rees. Finally, he appears in this word puzzle book. You can see there's a word search that only has the letters in monster. You're supposed to find the word monster hidden 9 times here. There's Tessek there in the bottom right. Like so many Jabba's Palace characters, Tessek was also featured in the Jabba the Hutt throne room action scene plastic model kit from MPC in 1983 and then re-released in the 90s by AMT Ertl. Here you can see him on the sprue. In fact, it might be a little bit difficult to look at him here, so let's go ahead and take him off. There we go. And, you know, for being a plastic model from the 80s, it's not really all that bad. There's a fair amount of detail, as you can see here. Speaking of miniatures, they also released a metal miniature in 1989. This was from West End Games and Grenadier Models. This is part of their Jabba's Palace Adventure set. And it's not a bad miniature either, although actually I think I would give the edge to the plastic one in terms of detail. After you leave the vintage era, there's a lot less merchandise available for Tessek, but in the 90s they did at least consider making a Micro Machines figure of the character. This would have been one of those Micro Machines heads that has the head of the character that opens up into a little environment and a full-body miniature figure of that character. This concept artwork was created by Errol McCarthy for Galoob Toys, but unfortunately they never actually made this particular one into an actual product. There is one person, however, who's trying to keep the Micro Machines dream alive, and that is Brian Webb. Today he's using a Patreon to make his own versions of characters that never appeared as Micro Machines, and he's got quite a good-looking Tessek, as you can see here. I'm actually going to be joining this myself so I can get one of his Tessek and Rees figures. I'll put a link in the video description if you want to know more about that. The mid-90s saw the release of the Star Wars collectible card game from Decipher, and this Jabba's Palace expansion set included cards for just about everyone in the palace, including Tessek. A little blurb reads, "Quarren accountant embezzling from Jabba. Leader, escaped Mon Calamari after its subjugation by the Emperor, plotting to kill Jabba and free the Hutt's captives." And here's how you use him in the game. I've never actually played the game, though, myself. In the year 2000, we finally got the second action figure based on the character of Tessek, and that's from the Power of the Jedi collection here. This one came with not only the figure, but also a little booklet that we'll take a look at in just a second. The figure itself actually looks pretty good, I think. He's definitely completely plastic, though. He doesn't incorporate any soft goods at all. His cape and his skirt here are thick, bendy plastic or rubber. And he does come with one accessory, which is this blaster, which can fit in his holster and also into his left hand. This is a bit of a nice throwback to the vintage figure, since we also got a blaster with that one. And I will say it does look nice, even though his articulation is pretty limited. The one arm can only move up and down. He does have a swivel at the elbow for his blaster arm, which can also move up and down. Of course, his legs really can't do much of anything because they're here under this skirt. But overall, I would say it's a good-looking figure. Here we can put it next to the vintage figure just to get an idea of what they look like. Even though it's not quite up to modern standards, I would certainly use the Power of the Jedi version in a modern Jabba's Palace display. And aside from customs, we don't really have any choice because this is the only other figure they've made for him. As I mentioned, the figure also came with this booklet, which included quite a bit of information about Tessek as a character. We've got a little blurb on the back here. When the Empire invades Mon Calamari, Tessek escapes and becomes an accountant for Jabba the Hutt. Tessek despises Jabba and hopes to kill him and acquire his fortune. Unfortunately, Tessek doesn't realize his plans are known to Jabba's trusted servants and to Jabba himself. Ooh. We got some vital statistics for the character, his skills, which include things like being good with numbers, and just generally his personality, some of his equipment that he uses, and technology. It's actually pretty cool. I wish they included things like this with figures today. And on the back we have allies and enemies. It's interesting that they included Princess Leia as an ally because even though he did help her, technically it was for selfish reasons, and I'm not entirely sure about Reese either, but we won't look at that too closely. Anyway, it's a fun little bonus and actually tells you a little bit about who the character was. There are also a number of items that are just called Quarren, like this Quarren assassin from the Star Wars Miniatures game in 2004. This one looks so much like Tessek, I decided I had to buy one, but it won't get here in time for me to show it in the video. I did want to mention one such product, though, and that's the Boba Fett's Throne Room Lego set. I've made a couple of videos about this set in the past, by the way. This one came with a minifigure that's just labeled as Quarren, and it's a little unclear to me, looking at his outfit, whether they sort of intended him to be Tessek or not. His features make him look a bit more like just a generic Quarren, but I think you could make him work in a Jabba's Palace display if you really wanted to. This is apparently not available at the moment, but Engineerio has made a custom Tessek minifigure like this if you wanted something maybe a little bit closer to what we saw in the film. The highest end licensed collectible for Tessek is this mini bust from Gentle Giant, which came out just last year as an exclusive for the company's Premier Guild members. It really is quite well sculpted and painted, but unfortunately virtually all of them have a small crack here on the dagger. Still, it's a nice piece that goes well with Gentle Giant's extensive range of Jabba's Palace busts. There are also some unlicensed options, of course, if you want to go even higher end, such as these latex masks. The one on the left is for Tessek, and the one on the right is more of a generic Quarren, so you can see some of the differences there. These are by Chris Stevens Creations. I'll put a link in the video description if you're interested in checking those out. Well, I hope you enjoyed this look at the character of Tessek. There's always something else I could have included, so if you think I overlooked something or didn't include your favorite piece of Tessek merchandise, for example, let me know in the comments. And thanks very much for watching. This video was brought to you with the help of my patrons from Patreon, including these Palace VIPs, Angelica Brady, and Jesper Murtu. If you'd like to learn how you could support the channel for as little as $1 a month, you can click the link in the video description.